Okay, so Winter, thanks so much for taking the time, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So just jumping right into it, how'd you first get into StarCraft?
Well, I got into StarCraft July 27th of 2010, which I believe is the day it came out. But before StarCraft, I was already addicted to Blizzard games. I played World of Warcraft for since about 2004. So, but by the time, by about in 2010, it had been a couple years. I'd been playing competitive arena in World of Warcraft. So the PvP mode, which and then my arena partners in 3v3 weren't on this late July day because apparently, and this was the first I had heard of it, or at least it felt like, they had gone picked up a new game called StarCraft 2. So next day, I go up to GameStop in person, like the box store, not the stock. But I pick up StarCraft and I canceled my WoW sub within like less than a week because clearly this was a better version of the competitive kind of PvP environment. And I was pretty poor at the time, so that WoW sub was a not insignificant part of my high school income. So, but that is how I started. But then immediately I got hooked onto it. Like I've always, and in a good and monetizable way, had poor impulse control. Where I have a tendency to, and to this day, play games for 12 plus hours a day. So getting into StarCraft, like I started out in the things I first found in the and like people I first talked to said you got to play Terran because Terran's overpowered, and it was actually statistically Terran was like 50% of GSL, but for a silver player, not as relevant. So I was actually I lost. These are all the sort of anecdotes that it feels weird because I've said it on stream hundreds of times, but like of my first 100 games or so, I lost 75, 80 of them. But I barely remember because that was like 2 days. So and, eventually I got out of silver by in the first few seasons of StarCraft 2. Map design was more creative, I think we'll put it. Where you could the air distance between bases was uh, quicker than walking. So I learned a build that was one base siege tank with siege mode. You get two siege tanks, you get 8 Marines, you drop them in the back of their mineral line, and that got me to platinum in a day. Like 20 out of 25 games when I'm like, I've learned the game now, which was not true, but it did get you a lot of wins back on Desert Oasis, Scrap Station. So that was like a rush. And then eventually, well, literally and figuratively, but eventually, I realized like I wanted to play Zerg. I thought Zerg was cooler. I've been watching Husky, Day 9, eventually graduate very quickly the progression Husky to Day 9. But I realized I wanted to play Zerg, even though my computer didn't want to play Zerg because it was already several years old and barely played World of Warcraft. But so I eventually switched to Zerg and I got my first experience being demoted. I got demoted from Diamond to Platinum as Zerg. But then I kind of picked up Zerg as my main race for a while because I liked creep spread. I liked mutalisks. I like the idea of just building way more units. I've always been a bit of a macro player myself. Never really as intense on the micro front. So all of like just the options for all of it. I've gotten kind of far away from the how did you first get into StarCraft part, but uh all of this, like the options for all of this, while it like the long term part of it, I wasn't thinking about, but it kept me interested, clearly, and still does, though in a somewhat different way. So
That
there's there's your answer.
that totally makes sense. Thank you. No, that was a great answer. Have you ever like so you mentioned World of Warcraft? Have you ever been like really invested in any other gaming communities?
um, it well the most obvious one is Planet Side 2, which is uh a massively multiplayer online first person shooter. But in reality, or at least the way I treat it, is a real time strategy game. You got, um, and it's free to play. You can go play right now. It's still in active development, believe it or not, despite being 10 years old. But Planet Side 2, which I kind of became one of the few like relatively high viewer count streamers of it because it's kind of not great for stream sniping, like literal stream sniping
Oh,
in that case. But I made an outfit of which sometimes you have 40, 50 players with you, and you're controlling a map that is a continent in this case of like you've got combined arms, you got vehicles, tanks, and like infantry, and you got to move your essentially in this case it's like marines around, but the marines are actual people, so they micro worse usually. But it always grabbed me as starting like 2016 or no, I believe 2017 is when I really got into it. But um, I've been involved in that not as much like very recently, but for several years. I've casted some of the big events like the community smash events where there's over 1,000 players, and participate in outfit wars, which is like the competitive environment. So it's about as close you'll get to RTS in an FPS game. I mean, it's got Terran so as well with their Space Marines, which is what I played for. Really pretty obvious reasons, but yeah, I'd say PlanetSide 2 is the biggest one. I've played other games, but I wouldn't say I was too big of a direct participant in the communities. But PlanetSide would come to mind as an example.
did you ever plan on competing as a pro in StarCraft?
I mean, I don't think you get into StarCraft really without, or at least into laddering um into a multiplayer without, especially early on, without at some point imagining competing as a pro. And I guess you could, like, I've won mostly in local land tournaments around the Metro Detroit area, but a couple $1,000s in those smaller tournaments. But I did want to compete as a pro, as uh, most players do. I made efforts to it. Like I got pretty high level, beaten some pretty high level players, but never. I think the best way to describe it is I've continually been at the level to know how much I don't know or how much I can't accomplish. Without like I've gotten to grandmaster. I've gotten pretty high up. I've played just random as well. Like I know how much work goes into that. And while I do think a lot of StarCraft is a combination of talent and practice, that talent part is important to get to the very top. But I think almost anyone could get to at least competitive, to a place where maybe they're not taking games off Cyril, but who am I going to throw under the bus? One of my usual targets, maybe a few games off Cure. I don't think. Uh,
Easy peasy.
but I think at some point, especially when I got into more streaming and eventually YouTube, that the time and mental energy it would take kind of dropped off in favor of doing what I'm arguably better at, which is just talking about StarCraft. So I ended up focusing on that. But they're definitely like that was at the very start, especially obviously the goal. I was on a bunch of uh, well, amateur teams where everybody coming together, and we got like the first team I was on team was Zero Limits, which apparently ended up having significant limits because most of us were diamond players, but um, ended up going to MLG and playing a few times. I remember I got in MLG in 2013, I believe it was. I got knocked out of the winners bracket by Bomber in the second round, which well, I
That's pretty
mean,
cool.
and then I made it through like 6 rounds of the losers bracket, including beating some like relatively solid grandmaster players. Where I got knocked out by Oz, who was another Korean Protoss player who ended up obviously going a lot further. So that was about the closest I've been to any sort of real. Uh, um, in fact, my greatest winnings, just to kind of give you a nice segue, I think here is my greatest winnings in StarCraft 2 were the StarCraft 2 achievement hunt for Twitch Rivals, where myself and a bunch of other StarCraft streamers really put a lot of effort into completing the campaign at 100% achievements. And this is also, not coincidentally, the event where Twitch rivals realized they needed to limit streamers to 8 hours a day for their events, because otherwise, they wouldn't. So, but yeah, that actually ended up being my biggest source of winnings in StarCraft 2. So, not exactly what you consider competitive multiplayer, but there's your long answer to a short question.
No, it's very, very cool answer. So like, how did you end up getting involved in streaming in general?
I think we can just go through, especially the first few years, and then kind of bring it to closer to today as a rocky few years to start, though a very educational set of them. Um, Starting out, like I said, I was on my self built computer with a totally and utterly provable, may or may not be provably legal copy of Windows XP, was not necessarily up to the task of streaming in the early 2010s. And if anyone remembers the early 2010s, watching GOM TV, where we were lucky to know if there were 2 or 3 digits in the supply, like that was the level of quality. But at the same time, um, I saw like Day Nine, like Husky, Destiny. Uh, there are a lot of streamers. One of my favorite streamers before I really got into streaming, I eventually got a new PC that was good enough to stream. And today, definitely not. But at the time, 720p, close enough. Like late game, but it could. But one of the streamers I looked at the most, even though I was a Zerg player technically to start, was Xlev. He was a Protoss player. I believe he was on EG, but he kind of did what a lot of other streamers weren't doing, despite how many viewers that like Hydra would get or something. Is he would actually commentate and talk about what he was doing. He wasn't the fastest player, but he'd be like, "I'm putting my pylon here for this reason," or "I'm taking my third base at this time because I saw this," and that kind of. If I had to pick out someone in particular, it was Axlav who really informed what I would eventually like to think I'm doing, which is like this edutaining kind of style where you still feel like you learned something, even if you don't want to apply it necessarily. And that grabbed me as something interesting and maybe a bit more accessible for someone who wasn't competing for the top tier tournaments. But by about 2012 or so, I did have this ability. I started, I think, streaming around 2012 ish. I started streaming regularly around 2013, I believe, because it was Heart of the Swarm was starting out, for better or worse, if depending on who you ask. But 2013 was when I started. I was going to school. Like StarCraft 2 came out. I'm gonna date myself. Just turned 30, so great time for this. But StarCraft 2 coming out, I was in high school, and then I eventually um, I went to University of Michigan for engineering, but engineering undecided, which tells you how committed I was to that idea. I, um, but most of my time and my energy was taken up by playing StarCraft all night and then staying up and watching GSL at what amounts to 5 a.m. And a lot of people out there might be like, why didn't you just go to bed early and wake up? To which I say, casual. But that is kind of why I started streaming, and I do to this day. I say I work 9 to 5, but the other one, because that ends up, and even then, that was when I was streaming a lot of the time, and it kind of now this isn't intentional, but it amounts to being a big fish in a small pond as opposed to like a whale in the ocean, because obviously earlier in the day you got most people who see daylight on watching, but also a lot more streamers for that same reason and stuff. So it did end up being kind of helpful for getting a demographic of people who aren't necessarily watching those streamers. And also, I mean, I was at least attempting to go to school on a regular basis. So I had to start out at that time. And then it was around I want to say, oh yeah, I know because I still have a few subscribers who remind me dramatically every month. But end of 2013, going on 10 years, partnered with Twitch. And Twitch, this is before Amazon. Partnership was you literally had to be rubber stamped essentially by somebody. It wasn't the automated like affiliate system or something. So it was kind of a big and seemingly random event to some extent. But I got partnered in the near the end of 2013. So that was also when it kind of gotten to the point with school like I'm doing it. I'm not doing incredible. I wasn't failing, but it wasn't so far away from that I am proud of it. But so I actually ended up switching to business school, which was also somewhat undecided for the next semester, and I did one semester of that, and I kind of realized, well, because I'm at the point I'm lucky enough to like my parents they weren't well off, but they were comfortable. I had a form of a scholarship for school that meant I didn't have to take out loans or anything. So I'm essentially lucky enough to start at zero at this point. So I'm at zero, which is better than most people get. And I decided like if there was ever a time to try to go full time, like it starting at zero is probably the best opportunity. Especially since like I got partnered and I gotten to the point with donations and aside, they're not donations. Do your taxes. There's a surprise. It's not as bad as it was, but there are so many streamers who think donations mean I'm a registered charity and I don't have to do. No, no, please. I mean, not my problem, but it may be theirs if they continue. It's a tip. It's a earned income, but that was pretty much all of it was subscribers and tips essentially, which was a lot bigger part of it before Amazon and everything like that. But and then we go 2014. So my parents not super enthusiastic about this idea, but because I'm still living at home, which they were nice. I like I said, starting at zero, not mortgage, not debt or anything. So no better time. But so I gave it a shot, and over the first few months, well, I went from streaming probably 7, 8 hours a day when I could, maybe 4 to 6 days a week to like 12 hours a day, usually 7 days a week, which I look back and I think is maybe a bit much.
Yeah, maybe.
Uh, but this was like I said, I poor impulse control and also just I throw myself into stuff and for better or in many times for worse, but at least if you learn from it. But it was, and then this will start the first year, kind of a lot of ups and downs that eventually smooth out. But first experience with getting swatted, which I think most people who know streaming know by this point, so I won't get into. I don't love rehashing a lot of this, but uh, I was lucky enough it happened near the end or right after the end of a stream. So I had turned off the stream and then I hear in my parent I'm like upstairs in my parents' house and I hear I mean, I don't know exactly, but the police yelling up. And I go out like turn look down the stairs. I go down up and down like dozens of times every day and see assault rifles pointed above like riot shields at me. And I know what's going on in my head, but you don't have much going through your head when you're not an experience I'd love to relive.
Sounds
Uh,
horrible. Sorry
my
that happened.
parents also not fans of that, though apparently it was all specifically oriented to me, so it wasn't as bad for them. But anyways, well, at the very least, I got a working relationship with the department after that. So it was attempted, but not successful a couple times in the future, and then eventually, I think it became more common. to the point where it's not good, obviously, but they have a lot more tools for dealing with it and actually catching the people. But yeah, that was not a fun moment. But and
That
then
sounds
as
horrible.
time, yeah, uh, but I mean, I'm still, I intentionally didn't let that like affect my schedule or anything because I was lucky enough it happened like at the end of the stream because obviously you don't want to give it attention because that's kind of the point of it.
For sure.
Um, but then like I built up a whole lot of viewers and subscribe like just being on approximately half the time you
Yeah.
catch a lot of people. Uh, and then like I worked a little later on and I finally like I took some time. I took like a couple weeks after some months because one thing I hadn't done is get Grandmaster. I hadn't gotten the Grandmaster. I had gotten so close. We didn't have the exact MMR uh back in the day. You just had I think I'm close like your high
Yeah.
rank masters. Like I think I'm pretty close. So you don't know exactly. But then eventually I had to go on a barcode. I ended up streaming with like a 2 minute delay, which I hate doing. Just in general, it doesn't really work with the whole uh streaming and interaction thing. Because at this point, I had, for better or worse, I hadn't really thought about it, but I kind of got into the I'm always reacting. Like you come in, you write something in chat, I'm gonna say something. Like now that's not always necessarily a good thing, but it does keep people engaged, I guess is uh an up and down of it. But so I cut that out for a couple weeks to get and I did get Grandmaster. So it's always obviously very satisfying to see it pay off like that, especially when you kind of take a I mean, doing stuff like that does get people invested in the stream. But if it had taken like 2 months, then maybe it would have been different. But 2 weeks or so was enough, and I felt like that was a big deal. But then, unfortunately, not too long after, I clicked on a link, which many people on the internet do, but it was an image link, or so I thought. And at the time, like many people should be using, I was not using a VPN, so I was DDoSed for, and it. You might be like, okay, well that's bad. I was DDoSed for the better part of a month.
Oh man.
It was personalized. Like it was this person or people have the IP. And I'm gonna before the technical experts come in, I'm gonna talk about I was once again starting at zero, my parents' internet, which was from wow exclamation point, literally wow exclamation point, which is an internet company so good when you want to look for customer support, they give you a phone number. That's how you know they're great. So you have to, in order to get any sort of customer support, you have to call them,
Hmm.
which is always a great sign for an internet company. So what I learned, and not to get into the technical weeds of it, but you couldn't change your IP, essentially. They
Oh.
did not support dynamic IP. Adding a VPN after the fact doesn't change what your router's IP address is. So they already know where to go with the DDoS. So for the better part of a month, despite uh, until I eventually bought Comcast Business, and then I got my parents a different Comcast internet service, so split internet service. So now that was the way I eventually solved this because it was affecting them too. It was the whole house, like because it's all the same internet service. That's how DDoS works. So again, in not too many months, like it's affecting the like my parents are not the most like they're not it's not like they don't know how to use computers, but they don't know why the internet's not working, right?
Yeah.
Like, and obviously at that point to an extent, like I'm not paying a ton of bills, but it's my living, such as it is. So that really was a stressful and frustrating uh time, especially since I had gone from like 12 hours a day to some hours and then trying to figure out how to stop this from happening for some hours, which the worst part was sometimes it'd be like some days were fine, and that's the part is like because it seems like it's just some person individually or small group of people. But I did eventually solve it, and solve is a strong word for getting a new internet service entirely
Yeah.
installed, which took some time because I had to like it took like a week or two until I decided to do it, and then it takes another week or so before they come out and actually set everything up. And then I eventually get back to work, and then I eventually get back to work, and it does feel kind of weird to call it work. I'm still like I still have this weird reaction, cause well, they say if you enjoy what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, which is bullshit, by the way. That is, I enjoy it. I don't feel like I'm clocking in, but what I feel it's like a mental. It's just mental build, like working out, which I assume people do. Uh, you just build up over time, and at some point it's too much, and you kind of have to deal with that. But anyways, and also for the first few years, a lot of people saying like, "Well, what are you going to do when you get a real job?" Uh, uh, they don't, especially like less technologically oriented. In the last few years, coincidentally, when everybody had to stay inside and watch things on the internet all day, I get that question a lot less. For I wonder why, but anyways, so I get back to work, and then it isn't. It's quite a short time. It doesn't feel like any time at all after I get out of the DDoSing and dealing with the new internet service that there are claims of view bots on my channel on Twitch,
Hmm.
and I still like I cringe, not directly, but I look at myself up to that time and like internally and external, like I had been in the habit of no matter like chat message, uh, post, comment, criticism, good, bad, whatever, like I react. I become like a reactionary essentially. And I realize now, and I realized pretty quickly after that, I realized more every uh just constantly as time goes on. I guess the older you get, but for every follower, subscriber I gained with that, I optimistically turned one away. I say optimistically because I hope it was just one. Like,
Yeah.
but that just my reaction to that, obviously, uh, being such a reaction and already turning so many people away, was not great, to say the least. And I'm bearing the lead, a bit, but it was now not to get into explicit detail. It's not confidential, but remember Twitch at this time is well, I we started me and Twitch started a closer working relationship, which is a quite a spin, I think I'll put on it. But Twitch at this time is before Amazon, before your like automated corporate kind of setup. It is Twitch was originally founded as a bunch of uh, people who wanted to just watch more StarCraft. Like they couldn't watch StarCraft. Like there's UStream, and then they made Justin TV, and then Twitch. They've credited with StarCraft. Eventually, StarCraft didn't end up as the always largest game on Twitch, but so what I'm saying is there's a lot of people with common interests at the time. So after this, there was a much closer interest than I had experienced in me and my channel. Uh, and I think I gotta acknowledge, I do think at some point there were inflated views. Not that I wanted them, not that Twitch, obviously, not that Twitch wanted them, but did I articulate that in a way that was likely to really be positive or sympathetic? No, I very quickly and Twitch. I mean, it's in their interests for people to be interested in their site and trust on their site. So, but I had to because at this point it's my living, such as it is. But I'm not like I could go back to school. Like I had to decide, and I had motivation to decide, like, what am I doing? Like, what is the point of all this? Because I already knew I had. I see the payout every month, such as I know people are paying to watch. So I had to decide, but I realized like becoming. I had never. So if you're thinking, and I'm gonna phrase this as advice, I guess that's a nice way to do it. But you got to think before you post or say something. At least take half a second to think, is this going to make me look like more of a douchebag than I already am? And if you take that half a second, you're already half a second ahead of me for that first year or so, which I look back like, so what I did was I realized I need to actually figure out, like, it wasn't like I wasn't doing content or guides or anything, but it was just kind of no plan, throw on the stream, go. But I did 100 days straight of streaming. Like, not that I wasn't doing a lot of streaming before, but I actually cut down. Middle of that year or so, uh, I did a 100-day marathon of streaming. I showed up and I cut it down to 7 or 8 hours a day, which allowed me to actually focus on, and this was the beginning of what I think you'd see a lot more of from if you watch today or in general, is I mean, I'm live streaming, I react to the chat and stuff, but I'm more focused on what I'm doing right now, whether it's playing, whether it's trying to play at a high level or commentate games or do like guides and stuff. This was when I tried to have a plan for each day. And so this is when I went from of hundreds of subscribers, which already sounds like a humble brag, and it is, to I got over 1,000 in this, which at before Amazon Prime, before gifting subscribers, you couldn't even subscribe for multiple months in a row. That might not be true. I don't remember exactly, but there definitely wasn't any of the Amazon stuff. So that was kind of a huge deal, and that was more than like on top of the tips and everything like that. This it kind of secured me as full time. Like this is potentially more than I would make even if I finished my degree and got a job.
Yeah.
So like, and I do enjoy doing it, despite. And it was nice to figure out what I want to do because I had not, like, as soon as I went full time, I kind of stopped thinking about what I wanted to do and thought, go, like just stream and go and put yourself out there for 50% of all of the hours in the day, which is a bit much. Uh,
It
but
definitely sounds like it.
but it was at the end of this because the kind of good part to come out of this was with Twitch and this closer relationship. And I'm not going to call it an investigation because nobody officially said investigation. It was just a more direct interest. But that means I had contacts at Twitch that I didn't really have. And by the end of this, I was able to make my contract permanent. My contract at that time was to have 70% revenue cut of subscribers, which is a deal that was good enough that Amazon ended it a couple years ago. And it was kind of an exclusive handshake sort of deal that not um, all partners got at the time. It was kind of like you had to ask for it. I didn't even know about it until I heard it from someone else. So, and then another big part was I was approved for the front page rotation. So the front page of Twitch works kind of like the YouTube homepage, where it'll put up either people you're following or people it'll think you like based on who you follow, the games you watch. Of course, there's always like scheduled events and tournaments, but middle of the night, there aren't too many of those. So usually, I'd say even to this day, like according to the analytics that Amazon so kindly brought in, which we didn't have before, about a quarter of the views on Twitch still come from that front page rotation. So,
Hmm.
while it was a rocky start, I'm I'm not glad all the drama happened that I in many ways deserve, but it was very important for me to realize that I was not on a productive there are some people, some streamers and some like content creators who their entire entire personality is reacting to essentially just back and forth to what people are saying on whatever. But that isn't what I wanted to do when I took some time to think about it. So then, like, this was all, it all lined up nicely because then Legacy of the Void comes out in 2015, and I'm past this point. It's not smooth sailing, but I've kind of locked in a lot more about what I wanted to do. So, and then like 2016 and then 2017, I'm just naming the years now. I'm trying to think of exactly so like at this point I'm just kind of refining. There's some things like I restarted Bronze League Heroes, has been a big deal both for Twitch and YouTube. Um, though we may have to ask the recently risen Husky about how he feels about that. But I had thought like 5 years and he deleted his entire channel. So, I mean, there's no competition here. And I've done now over 200 episodes of it, though it's very hard to find true bronze players because at the end of the day, they still have to know how to upload a replay. So you'll never get that
That's a big barrier to entry.
pure. I hope for Stormgate that you can spectate any game as long as it's like on the public ladder or something. Anyways, but between like Bronze League Heroes, the low APM challenge ended up being a pretty big part. Like I think the low APM challenge kind of defines what ended up being my direction, which is something you can learn from, but still entertaining. And one, you probably won't apply it, but it's close enough. You'll feel like you're learning something. It's like watching a great like Discovery Channel kind of show. It's like, oh, that's or watching like Planet Earth. Like, oh, that's very cool. All right, now let me go back to my job. Like, but that kind of stuff is what eventually, because of all this start, I really focused on. And I'm gonna yada it all the way to I'd say from 2015 to today, like 8 years later. I've just been really working on refining that. So there you go. How has life as a streamer been? It ended up pretty okay.
It's funny. I don't know if I ever actually got to that question. I was just like, "How'd you get into streaming?" And I think we started from there.
Well, I'm gonna keep this to less than 30 seconds. But my job is to talk all day. So you could cut me off. That's your job. Okay, this is not my problem. This is a
No. I mean, I don't even think I needed to ask the questions. And you covered the topic. So at the end of the day, same difference. So I guess that sort of goes on to the next thing here. Your YouTube channel's very successful. Would you consider yourself more of a YouTuber than a streamer these days?
I think that kind of ended up being the because that was I feel like I figured out what I wanted to do with streaming. Not that I perfected it, but like I figured out the direction I wanted to take with it. But YouTube, I hadn't done that. It was around 2017 when I committed to going full time on YouTube, which was pretty much uploading a video every day. And it's been a continuing effort to figure out what my niche is on that because well, mostly of the Dutch. And when I say that, Loco, Euthermal, Harstum, did you know the SC2HL channel is also run by a Dutch person? So
Yeah. I met him at Get the Pizza.
The Dutch cabal
Yeah.
is quite the competition. So well, on YouTube there weren't like Euthermal and Harstum are the main examples. With the low APM challenge and stuff, I was actually the highest level player who was uploading games with commentary. So for a while, that was kind of my niche because Loco does a lot of casting and stuff, and it's not like you can't do the same thing. Starcraft is kind of an inordinately sized slice of YouTube and a very valuable one as well because believe it or not, there are a lot of relatively well off mid 20 to 30 something nerds who have somewhat high incomes who watch StarCraft compared to say your average Minecraft video. So it's like right now at this point I could probably just do YouTube and be all right. I don't want to, but if I had to for some reason, then I could focus on just YouTube content. But I do consider it. I put a lot of. I probably put more active effort into YouTube every day than I do on Twitch. Not in terms of time, but in terms of think about a thumbnail. Think about how clickbaity I need to be. Because there's a video from Veritasium who I honestly I bet there's a huge carryover of people who watch my channel to Veritasium, who is one of those educational channels. But he has a video called "Clickbait is Unreasonably Effective," which of course I clicked on. The way he phrases it is, you figure out what your content is, and then you figure out where it ends, and you put that in the box, and then the packaging is whatever you can do to get people to open that box, right? So that I've found, like, I don't think my casting has gotten significantly better from like 2 years ago. Maybe 10, 20, 30% better if I had to put a number on it. But my packaging has gotten 2, 3 times better. Now I get 2, 3 times as many views on those videos, despite being the same level or similar level of content. And unfortunately, people are much more stingy with their time on YouTube. Getting people to click on a 30-minute video on YouTube is 10 times harder than getting to click on a stream they'll watch for the next 6 hours. Just how it is. Like, so it does take a lot. I really had to move myself into the mindset, like a much more distilled version of what I did with Twitch, which is cut down on the time and get to the point. And I think that helped out a lot. And now I even have a second channel, and it was originally just for like VODs and stuff, but now I'm uploading. Like I'm playing Beyond All Reason, doing pretty well on there. I've been uploading like Nightmare Mode, stuff like that. But I do plan on continuing that into hopefully Stormgate, where I have like casting and commentary, and then on a second channel I have actual like gameplay and maybe some guides and stuff like that. Because there's just I have barely enough hours in the day, so I will use them.
So,
But yeah. So both is the answer, by the way.
I mean that totally makes sense. Um, what would you say is like the biggest difference between like being a streamer and being a YouTuber?
I think it is that level of reactionary. That like there are some things that people love watching on stream that on YouTube don't play as well. Like Uh, anything that's kind of bantering back and forth with Twitch chat. Like occasionally, if you edit it down, you can do like Twitch chat chooses this strategy or something. But you want to just have that little blurb on YouTube and then go for it, as opposed to the back and forth. And also, to be honest, not to take away from this video or something, but on Twitch, people much more likely to watch like a long form sort of interview or just discussion, whereas YouTube, people will probably skip to the timestamps or chapters or whatever just to find exactly what they're looking for. So it's a lot easier to do kind of a stream of consciousness sort of thing on Twitch, because the point is to be there. You're there to waste your time. Whereas on YouTube, you're there to spend your time, which is a bit of a different mindset. I don't even remember what the original question was, but I think I answered it.
Yeah, you did that. It was an interesting point. I basically just asked like the difference between being a streamer and a YouTuber. So yeah, I think you covered that. So when would you say is the last time you sort of considered moving away from content creation as a career?
Uh, Honestly, I never really seriously. I would say around that first year, when between all the kind of personal um challenges, I guess, for me and my family, and just kind of having not a lack of direction, would be the last time I seriously considered just moving on. Um, I've considered several times in the last few years, like changing the form of it, like what it looks like not necessarily moving to other games or something, but um, to be honest, I haven't. If I was forced to, I mean, I could probably stop for some months now and still be and spend time deciding. I don't want to, but I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. So, pass.
Um, so you do a lot of obviously online casts of games. Have you ever really tried to break into like the premiere event casting scene?
uh, uh, when it comes to break into, honestly, I don't have a guide or tutorial for you. I think there was a time where I would have liked to do that. Um, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't uh, accept casting a major event today, but probably, especially the pre-COVID time, uh, I did want to cast some live events. Not that I made any real efforts to that end. And from my understanding, it is a lot of, from the outside looking in, it is a lot of kind of who you know and like personal conversations and stuff that I'm not always great at, just networking in general. Um, but I wouldn't mind doing live events, but I also have a style, especially for casting. It is a bit of that reactionary. Like I have myself on the screen. I tried it without it for a while, but I have a tendency to my hands are another part of the whole conversation. People I tried doing some casts on YouTube, like more standard, like no without being on the screen, more official. But I think that is part of my brand overall is just kind of someone described it. I'm stealing this from a YouTube comment, but that's the best creators do is they steal and rephrase. Uh, is Winter's the best fan of these players I've ever watched casting, like where I'm just enjoying it and my enjoyment goes along. So the answer is yes. I have to an extent been interested. I haven't made big efforts to that end, but I wouldn't turn it down in the future. Though it isn't the easiest thing to break into, I think, especially at this point.
Oh yeah, where there's 3 events, so if you don't get one of those, I guess you're not casting a big event. Fair enough. That's definitely pretty interesting. So part of what you said there sort of perfectly leads into the next question. Of the active pros that are around today, is there anybody you really love watching play right now?
Around today, why limit it to that? I mean,
Okay, ever.
my first real favorite player was Pult. Um, where like his style of Terran and his personality, but his style of Terran, where he wasn't like the fastest player. It's like he's like the smarter Beyond. No offense, Beyond, but like, he wasn't the best micro player, but he was able to just outmaneuver everyone by just being a mental step ahead of them. But I think in the last few years, I like those players. I like the players. Like I'm a big Cyril fan. I mean, not the biggest Cyril fan, but like I enjoy watching great players play. But also, I enjoy watching the most less great players. Just I call it their best skill is winning, where they're not the best mechanically, but a good example historically has been the Protoss players like MC and Parting, where they're like, I'm not the best mechanically, but I know exactly when to kill you, and they do. Like Parting with his like Immortal Sentry builds and stuff like that. And then recently for Protoss is Zest, who historically just he would just win things he has no right to. Just throw away half his army, still come out on top. And then of course lose games horribly just because he threw away half his army. Like that also happened plenty of times. He lost to Cure in the GSL finals to Widowmine drops like 5 times in a row.
Yeah,
Well, not every game, but
almost.
uh and then for Zerg it's Dark, which like Dark it always seems like he's losing right up until he walks over his opponent. Like or well, it's the same it's very similar to Zest where sometimes he just turns it with something I literally just yesterday cast a game where Dark accidentally researched tunneling claws against Beyond. Like it was a misclick because he started speed, right? He didn't get burrow. Beyond saw the tunneling claws, pulled back to his base, and built like 4 turrets. Like Dark had misclicked it, but it's because it's Dark. Like Beyond is freaking out because there could be burrow move roaches in his base, and he just does that kind of stuff, and that's just unintentional. But he's willing to build like 4 hatcheries in his main because he knows he's not going to inject perfectly. Like I've never seen any other Zerg players admitting that so much as Dark does. But and then for Terran, it's probably Beyond, which is an easy answer. But it's just watching him make Terran look broken. On like he's still going Reapers after even getting them nerfed. Like
Yeah.
his metavacs make me see the real argument for why you shouldn't be able to pick up all your units instantaneously. But I still love watching it. So I think those are. I know Zest isn't playing this moment, but close enough. You know what? 5 years is pretty recent in SC too.
Yeah.
So
No,
uh,
definitely.
those are my favorite style to watch and to cast, because it's always like it's you can pick any game and it's gonna be worth it. So
No, those are great picks. I've always loved the players that play very like instinctually. And what you said is totally right. Those guys tend to always win on the counterpunch, right? Where it looks like they sort of just held something or took a weird fight, and then they just kill the person they're playing it, and it doesn't always seem to make sense. Um, so, so your ID Winter, where did that come from?
like much of my early career, poor planning and foresight. Uh, where uh, at some point I just settled on it as a name, no real reason. I thought it was pretty cool, as I say, with the one of my worst puns, which is a long list. But I now realize, and I've been workshopping other ideas because I'm not honestly that tied to it. I feel like even more than every random Korean player with their English noun, having a name that shares that is exactly the same as about 1/4 of the tournaments of the year is possibly not the smartest move. Uh, so, or maybe it was just huge omega brain, and now you can't watch a tournament without thinking about me. But that was not the intent. It just eventually became, I don't have anything better. I don't hate it, but it's not like I am so committed to the name and has a deep, dramatic meaning for me. It just ended up being the name. So that's about it. And then here we are.
Fair enough. So how do you feel about the overall health of like the StarCraft scene at this point?
Mm. Well, it is a weird spot. I feel like that would have been an accurate answer for many years. Like I first started really streaming and making content during the biggest downturn of SC2, which was Heart of the Swarm, which was partially just, I think it's overblown significantly because while other games became a lot more popular, that didn't hurt StarCraft particularly. A lot of people, StarCraft has always kind of, for better and many times for worse, inspired a sense of rugged individualism, where everything you earn, everything you get, you're taking from somebody else, and that is both in the terms of content creation, in terms of the general feel of the community, especially with Heart of the Swarm, where dead game became, and it did real damage. I look at it now and like it's a fun meme, but there are still people that assume that StarCraft died in 2013, and anyone still playing is just there for a nostalgia trip.
Yeah.
And almost every day, I get a comment on YouTube that's like, "Oh, I didn't realize this game was still having tournaments. I haven't played since like 20 early tens or pick a year." Like, and I think part of it was just natural interest drop off, and part of it was effort, an active effort, not a conscious effort, but an active effort by kind of a cannibalistic effort by the community too, out of jealousy, I guess, for other games. Because in StarCraft, it's all about winning 1v1, right? Which is not a healthy mindset for a like productive collaboration.
Yeah.
It's part of the reason why I think to this day there's not too much interaction between content creators. It's very hard for us, including me personally, to really think about working with other people in general because you kind of do it all yourself. But as for the SC2 scene at the moment, and I'm speaking on the content creator part because that's where I live and what I'm doing every day. But as for tournaments and stuff, I know you're going to ask about the new plans for the Pro Tour and GSL, so I'm just going to tie all that in together.
Sure.
And it's better than it was, which is not necessarily a good thing, but it's better than it was in that if you remember, for like 2018, 2019, 2020, at the end of every year was like, do we have a next year? Like, is there going to be WCS? And then like January, they'd be like, yes. Okay. So there's like a month or two, which I imagine is even worse for pro players by far, is like, is there even going to be a WCS or something like that next year? So we were lucky enough and a great timing going into 2020 to have a guarantee for several years. And I wasn't the least bit surprised to see a downsizing. This is what I said. I had no insider information, but I expected there to be significantly less prize pool. I honestly am not sure what kind of return on investment anyone's getting from these tournaments. They don't get a huge amount of viewers. They have a lot of sponsors, and like I said, though, of the viewership, it is a lucrative demographic of the StarCraft demographic. But at the same time, 20,000 people compared to 250 is still barely a comparison when it comes to like ad revenue and stuff. So I don't know exactly how the sponsors rate it. There is a prestige to StarCraft that I think is factored in as well, but a lot of it feels like a passion project. So the biggest thing for me as a content creator are the weekly cups, because that is my constant source putting out. I could probably run my channel just off the weekly cups, though I do like to be a little more discerning, and like with the Korean Star League stuff starting up. So I think everyone feels the elephant, or really more the angel in the room, with Stormgate hanging over, and everyone's kind of in a holding pattern until then, is what it feels like. Everybody's waiting to see, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Stormgate, but I won't get into that. But that's where we are now, and there's still great tournaments going on. I'm not a personally huge fan of a lot of the meta. I've been a anti-ghost evangelist for many years. And like, rarely a day goes by of me playing StarCraft on my stream, as Terran usually saying the Widow Mine was a mistake. Like, but I still love watching top tier games, but it does feel like both for pros and for at the end of the day, I am going to reference Kevin Dong I interviewed him for the lead designer of Stormgate, former lead co-op designer. He said the best way to get more viewers on your game is to have more players. And that is true. Like, if you look at League of Legends or Dota, and you'd have to read the better part of an encyclopedia just to even understand what's going on in the game. They still get hundreds of thousands, millions of viewers because people are playing the game, because for many reasons, it has a lot more players. StarCraft has not done a great job in the past, and in fact, has actively promoted you will break your wrists just trying to play ladder. All right. And this will be more stressful than your wimpy day job. So get on the ladder and fail. Like, and then if you're lucky, you'll go 5-5 and lose 30 MMR. Like, and that is not, believe it or not, the most encouraging thing for many people. So even if they still like pro games, I think over time interest drops off. And the current kind of downsizing is a result of that. Like, there's just a little less viewership, not a lot. There's less players, though still more than there were before free to play. And I wasn't surprised, and I'm not surprised to see. I think this is not a bad option for the plans for this year for the Pro Tour, and that leads into the GSL, which I don't know if anybody's been paying attention, but there's not a lot of new players in Korea.
Yeah.
Maru, for many years, was the youngest player in GSL, which is saying something. When the same player is the youngest player for like 5 years in a row, maybe you're not cultivating much of a new scene.
Yeah.
StarCraft 2 has never been very popular. Like, Brood War just got back to apparently being #1 streamed game on Africa TV. Like, they overtook League of Legends. Brood War! That one! Ask Artosis about it. Like,
Did you see the
I
spreadsheet with the streamer earnings for
I'll
Brood
say
War?
this: I wouldn't have made the list, and I'm a pretty large streamer in StarCraft too. I wouldn't even gotten close to that list of Brood War earnings. And whenever anybody asked me, I did not to tread on that point, but I have actually seen it, and they listed just like the top 20 streamers or something, and every single one of them made a bunch more than I did on Twitch, streaming StarCraft 2 most of the day as one of the largest StarCraft 2 streamers. And what they've done with it, but apparently, from my understanding, what they've done is create like this collaborative. They have like I don't know, some sort of university. I say in quotes because it's like a reality show kind of thing where they have pro players, personalities, and I think we should make an effort. I say we as content creators to do something like that for Stormgate. It's going to be important as elitist as we are to interact with people who are, less laser focused on having 300 APM and more laser focused on appealing to 300 more people every day. So, but yeah, Brood War is, uh, like it shows that, well, in Korea, obviously, but I don't think that it's unique to Korea. If you focus on the right kind of content and community, you will find the interest. But I don't think the interest was ever there for StarCraft 2, partially because of Brood War in Korea. So, in seeing every year it dropped to like less players and a weirder format, I'm not surprised at the GSL reductions. It had gotten down to you'd be hard pressed to pull 16 players out, and call them top players on a regular basis in Korea. So it is disappointing, obviously, and I'm sure if they add some crowdfunding, they could add to the prize pool. But you got to think about, and the older I get and the more I learn, the more I like the doing it yourself aspect. Because for GSL, you got to pay camera crew, any organizational staff, makeup, half a dozen casters, the whole setup in person. You're probably renting whatever area you're in. This is hundreds of thousands of dollars just off the bat, just to show up probably once.
Yeah.
So, adding another 50K to the prize pool, it is incredibly disappointing. It's actually like it is quite a drop and almost insulting, I think, to still call it GSL.
Yeah.
But uh, I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed. Is the summary on it? And that is by far the biggest aspect is that the region that was the largest amount of percent. And Global StarCraft League has always been a bit of a misnomer,
Yeah.
but especially now at this point, it is going to be a shadow of what it once was. But not particularly surprising to me now.
So you mentioned Brood War. So there was recently the announcement for the Gamers 8 tournament in Saudi Arabia, right? Were you hearing a lot about that?
I know about it, yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of crazy, right? So it's maybe going to be the biggest prize pool Brood War tournament ever if the prize pool is split between StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2 evenly. But I guess the sort of topic I'm more interested in is the backing and the location of the tournament, right? That's where all the controversy has been around. How do you feel about that? Do you think
I
like
don't like it.
okay,
I now obviously before getting into any sort of what about sort of conversations, which you can immediately do. Saudi Arabia is, from my layman's understanding, one of the worst offenders of human rights abuses and generally uh, morally bankrupt, from my perspective, organizations in the world. And they have a lot of money, a lot of money,
yeah,
and they aren't afraid to use it. So that will get you very far. So that rolls around. And now it's important to note that Saudi Arabia technically owns ESL, or at least is a major I'm not exactly sure, but effectively.
yeah,
Now I don't know what organization, if it's the government or individuals, but I do think there is a difference. Like an individual is not going to make a difference here in boycotting or otherwise. But if ESL continues operations as relatively usual, like a tournament, if suddenly IEM Katowice became IEM Riyadh, then
Yeah.
well, that would be different. But at some point, I think if they're backing the organization hasn't changed, okay. But there's the literal question of whether some players should even attempt to attend a tournament in Saudi Arabia. So I'm not a fan of it. I will hopefully take the replays they release and cast them with as little, because that's I want good games for the fans, and I do care about where they come from. I don't know how to fight that particular battle. Put a heck ton of money into it, but I don't love it, and that's a massive understatement. I don't know what to do about it personally. Like, I'm not going to promote the tournament, but I will do what I usually do, which is cast any replays and point out any good StarCraft. So on one side, obviously, I'm interested in a tournament that supports StarCraft, and on the other side, it's one of the worst ways I've seen it done. So it's not a great it and just to throw that in there, it kind of feels like how I felt about Blizzard for the last some years, where it's like, I really like StarCraft, but dot dot dot.
Yeah. But a lot.
So the summary is like, I don't know what to do about it, but I will voice my dislike of most parts of it. So that's all I got.
I appreciate that. So sort of tying into the last question here. So we talked about Stormgate a couple times throughout this conversation. What are you thinking about Stormgate? What are your expectations for that game?
How much time do you have?
You go as long as you want.
So I'm gonna start off with saying I am willing to be optimistic for lack of any other realistic option. In my opinion, they're if they can't do it, no one can. And if that sounds like putting a lot of pressure on them, it is. So they have built and put together the best possible, maybe not the best possible, but by far the most competent on paper team for building an RTS game in the last decade. Like, there is no one that I know of, and I like to think I'm in the know, especially a clearly Starcraft, Warcraft esque sort of Blizzard style RTS. Now I'm gonna go with a little bit of background. I've been playing Beyond All Reason, which is a it's the spiritual successor to Total Annihilation, which I didn't play, or Supreme Commander, which I didn't play. But this is an open source, open development. It's literally just a bunch of volunteers in their free time. They don't even have a donate button because of like legal restrictions right now. So you like they just have some dudes paying for the server out of their pocket. But this game feels like it's had so much love put into it. You can tell the developers played the game, which is something that I'll just say, Relic has been a massive and utter disappointment. Um, Age of Empires 4 was maybe good on the surface. It looked good to many people, but as soon as you try to play it over 50 APM, my line is they tried to reinvent the wheel and came out with a block. Like they and now they announced it's coming out for console, which explains at least some of the design decisions. But they charge $60 for something that feels closer to Brood War to play than to like StarCraft or even Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition. Company of Heroes 3 releases for $60 to mixed reviews on Steam, even though they had an extra some months past the original date and like 5 years development. So, building an RTS game, not easy, I thought. And then I played Beyond All Reason, which I've been doing lately, which the UI is old school, but it has all these features like you can drag an attack move. So you just attack move, but in this area, and your units will only target things in that area. You can drag, like hold right click, and you make a formation. Like imagine splitting Marines X distance apart. There are all these little features and controls that they've made or adapted in an open source engine on their free time that feel like a new generation of RTS. So I think this rolls into I think Frost Giant, who I know, and I wanna call out Neuro of all people, okay? Because Neuro made a post after visiting Frost Giant, I think the second time, which was on brand for Neuro. He was very, very positive, very uh, intense, and it came off like the biggest PR post I've ever read. But that is just like if you've never met Neuro, that is just Neuro. I believe it fully that he feels that way. And I've met most of the people he's referencing, but I cannot imagine to someone just coming in like, who is this guy and why is he complimenting people who haven't released a single video of gameplay yet? Which is fair. But with Stormgate, I feel these people, they have every vested interest. A lot of them took a big risk just to join an indie studio. Like building an RTS studio in the 2020s is not probably the smartest business decision from many perspectives.
Yeah.
But I truly believe that everyone working there wants to build the next RTS game. And if I had to compare my expectations for Stormgate and what I've actually talked to the team to some extent about, what I would expect is not League of Legends, not Dota, but something like a Rocket League. I think Rocket League is the best example of a game that on its surface you can understand right now. It's soccer car. Like you got flying through the air, and any noob can pick it up and have fun with it. They'll be very bad, but you can immediately see the good players. Like you can immediately understand those are good players. You might not know how they're doing it, but you know they're great players. It's great to watch. And I think Stormgate can be that for RTS.
Hmm.
It can be something that a new player can pick up and like with if you build it correctly from the ground up, which SC2 had tutorials tacked on. They just in their newest interview. A lot of RTS tutorials are tacked on, or they even rely on like YouTubers, which I mean, good for me, but it can be a game you pick up and play with your friends. With the I have been, and they're focusing on a big advocate for the 3v3 sort of modes, which might not grab the attention of your pro gamers, but I think it's very important to have stuff like this on top of a map editor, which they've said they're building alongside everything. And the SC2 map editor, and of course the Warcraft 3 map editor, which kind of started everything, has been the source of so much content outside of just hardcore 1v1 games. So I think Stormgate can be Rocket League for RTS if we need a soundbite there, because a game that's accessible to everyone has a clear definition of what skill looks like, but so much depth to it when you really get into it. But it's not intimidating because it's just fun to play in the first place. So SC2, on the other hand, and I think SC2 completely and utterly, they didn't drop the ball. They never picked up the ball on team games. Like it never, like there was no ball at all. It's team games is just you pasted. The fact that you can't build on your teammates' creep, even though that blocks the wall on some maps, like
Yeah.
clearly there's no effort put into team games at all. This is another thing where I think they can learn from. Well, there's plenty. Like Age of Empires 2 and Beyond All Reason have great systems for team games. Age of Empires 2 has each civilization has like a bonus that affects them and also their team. Like archers have +1 range or whatever. Beyond All Reason, you can easily transfer resources to and from. And in fact, one of my favorite features is if your teammates can't spend their resources and they're like over the cap, they get automatically sent to the rest of the team. So even if your teammates are, less experienced players, most players are pretty good at mining the resources. They're just struggle to develop like a production or an army. So in that case, it actually benefits you. And a lot of this stuff could have been added in StarCraft 2 team games. I don't think, and in fact is in some of the sort of custom game stuff, but no effort at all. That's why I think the casual player base for StarCraft 2 never really materialized. Why in their interview they said that I'm not a real like this is a quote from Tim quoting someone else. I forget which Tim. Not really important. But I'm not a real StarCraft player. I've only played campaign, and I never really tried multiplayer. And then Tim responding like, "You're like 75% of people, okay? Like, don't worry." Like,
Yeah.
because there was never really that feel like with co-op. It grabbed, and co-op was the most popular part of StarCraft 2 and continues to be, especially with the mutators. Is I've seen the graph where co-op is it goes up and then it slowly drops down every time a new commander. Then they added mutators. It's just a straight line. And then a new commander it goes up, kind of comes back down. But those mutators kept people around. And that was the most basic, like just slap a few things on. There's so many examples of games you can steal these ideas or appropriate these ideas from. That I think Stormgate can like you could implement them in StarCraft right now if you had both the if you had the executive ability to do so. So I think a new game with these ideas built in, and I know they're thinking about it. You can, at risk of drawing people away, you can watch my interview with Kevin Dong, and I plan on doing another one. I plan on doing more interviews. And I'm sure you are as well. As soon as we see some gameplay, that's my. I do agree. Past this point, until we see any gameplay, it does feel more like a fluff piece.
Yeah.
But I think we're getting to that point. They got the beta announced for this year, but I know Kevin, who is the lead game designer. He came from Team Liquid. He was a monk on Team Liquid. He wrote a bunch of in-depth articles about pro games. He was so knowledgeable about StarCraft 2 co-op, they hired him as the lead designer. And I mean, he knew more about co-op than probably anyone at Blizzard. Spreadsheets everywhere. Okay, way more detail. And then he developed some of the coolest and most fun co-op commanders, the ones I actually enjoy playing because they're not like just StarCraft, but with a twist. Like Manx, like Tychus, Stepman, that have these kind of cool mechanics that are different but still fun and not frustrating. So I do think, and I in my increasingly elder age, I do appreciate these versus. I like how they're calling it 3VE is the intent for a lot of the content, and I really like the idea personally of in team games and maybe having an objective based team mode of having different roles, almost like class roles. I doubt it'll be exactly like that, but maybe you can pick from like how you can pick masteries in co-op. Maybe you pick more like maybe one choice is to increase or have a certain defensive tower or something, and then another player mines resources faster, but they can't build that defensive tower, stuff like that. And then you combine that team together to face this mission and this mutator, and you can just keep slapping on dozens of different modifiers. Then you add in the map editor, and people will make even better stuff for you. And they've already talked about an interest in adding things to like the Steam Workshop that you couldn't do in StarCraft 2. Like you have things like in StarCraft 2, one of my favorite things I ever did was the announcer pack, which, oh, by the way, and part of the reason they get the benefit of the doubt was I just in 2017 or 18, I was like, I'll shoot my shot. I emailed Tim Morton. I'm like, hey, how about an announcer pack? Just thinking, what's the worst he says is no. Like, I phrased it very nicely. He's like, let's do it. I'm like, oh wow, okay.
That's
So
awesome.
like that was one of my favorite things to do. I put a lot of work into that, but like that also tells you, and it doesn't make a lot of money. Like it's not selling as much as I like to think. It's not selling tens of thousands of units. Probably cost more to make between paying me for it, which I didn't even realize they would do. But I guess legally they should. But like, Tim didn't have to. He could have just not. But he put the effort in, and he was interested in doing it, and that clearly interested. And I think with him, he's essentially the production director of the game. He's the one who decides what they're going to work on, and then kind of lets the qualified people do it. And I think it's been said many times that he's very good at that, letting people kind of do what they're good at. So the summary is I'm clearly optimistic. I think it's not going to be a StarCraft 2. It's not going to overtake Twitch. It's not going to replace a lot of the current. Well, it will likely, I think it will effectively, compared to what we've seen, destroy the StarCraft 2 scene.
Yeah.
I do think within months it will reduce the StarCraft 2 tournaments to like some weeklies and maybe the occasional major tournament, but within a year, if Stormgate is anywhere close to successful, it will be the effective end of StarCraft 2. But hopefully, uh, for something better, which is something I haven't. It's very weird for me to say because for 10 years I've said I'll play the best RTS. So that has had the same answer for most of those 10 years. But so I'm optimistic. I'm not overly like it's going to be the biggest game ever, but I do think it can be something like a Rocket League for RTS.
I think that is a very sober perspective. And yeah, I share your optimism for sure. But overall, I just want to say thank you for taking the time. This one went a little long, but I think we got a lot of really good answers, so I do really appreciate it.
That's well, it's my job. I apologize
No
to some
apologies
extent,
necessary.
but a accurate representation, I think.
Any closing words?
Um, well, I'd like to just go through it. First, if you made it through all this and you're one of those people I described as turning away, in the relatively early days, I know StarCraft. I mean, your name is the StarCraft historian, so StarCraft players have long memories. It'd be awesome if you gave it another shot. Uh, Otherwise, for those who have followed and watched StarCraft and me, thank you. I say my tagline that I landed on is, "I hope I made your day a little bit better." So I hope I made your day a little bit better. Thank you for having me. And good luck. Have fun. That's all I got.
Thanks so much, man.